travel schedule, we were so late getting back home that what I decided to do was just invite everybody onto the live stream here on Shabbat. So I'll have my class who were able to log in on Zoom and participate that way. And then I've got the YouTube live stream hooked into it as well. So you're all in here together today, people who don't already have a Shabbat service. And so there'll be a little bit of delay. My class will probably notice there'll be several seconds if they're trying to look at two devices. If you're watching on Zoom, you might see one thing, and then if you're watching on YouTube, there'll be a little bit of a lag time. So you might have to decide which device you're going to use so you don't get confused hearing a very delayed echo in here, right? So it's good to be back. We had a wonderful Sukkot, and it was a long trip, but we did, take our time, see some sights, just kind of hunker down for Shabbat and enjoy the peace and the quiet and those sorts of things. And I know the dogs are glad to be home, so don't be surprised if these guys start snoring really, really loud. They're as wasted as we are. I think the older we get, whether we're animal or human, the more we like our routines and the more we like our own bed to sleep in, and we like for that bed to stop moving. And so they're having to, well, they're not having to do anything. They're just laid out here on the bench beside me right now. So that's why I'm not going to be surprised if I start hearing snoring here in a few minutes. So let's get started. What I'd like to do is what I wanted to do for you at the Sukkot camp. I was doing a teaching on the priestly blessing from the Song of Songs, and because of the Wi-Fi situation and everything, it didn't get recorded. And so my class didn't get to hear it unless they happened to be on there live. And you guys, of course, didn't get to hear it because I didn't have any way of uploading something that I didn't have a copy of. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to play catch up today. We're going to go back and we're going to do this lesson on the priestly blessing. And then next week, we should be not just back on the track, but chugging down the track on our Shor portions. And what I really love about this lesson is I learned so much in preparing it. I kind of, we've been in a congregation since the late 90s, I guess. And we just kind of got used to the priestly blessing being a part of the service. And over the years, maybe I quit thinking so much about the significance of the priestly blessing as a part of the service. And so it's like, they said, stir up the gift that's within you. Sometimes you need to stir up your thoughts. That's always the risk. When you do something over and over, you stop questioning, you stop thinking, you stop looking for significance, you stop reminding yourself, why am I doing this week after week? And so here at the turn of the year, I thought this is a great time for us to look at the priestly blessing, because I think probably most of you on here were able to watch the video that we did with the temple wall, behind the temple wall. And so this lesson is going to hook right onto that. What's behind the temple wall. We looked at the windows and the lattices and so forth. And now we're making this transition, and we're going to go from what's behind the temple wall. We're going to look at the priestly blessing, which occurred in the temple. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So now we're going to share the screen with you. And I'll just have to kind of remind my class, if you're tuned in on Zoom instead of YouTube, if you would, make sure that you have your video turned off, because what can happen is you might pop up onto the YouTube screen, which is probably not what you want. Like I say, this lesson today, it'll be a little maybe disjointed from a technological point of view, because I have no idea when we get to the audio portion of this, where I want to play the priestly blessing at the kotel for you so you can hear it and see how it's done in the synagogue, and see how it's done on the feast days, and see how it might be different from what you've experienced before. I don't know if that'll go well, prayers up for it. But if it doesn't, we're just going to roll with it and just say, you know what, I could put a link on here and you can go listen to it anyway. But I want you to have an opportunity, even where you are, even if you're just watching on your laptop or watching on your phone, I wanted you to have an opportunity to respond, and to do, if you were able to go to the Western Wall at Passover or Shavuot or Sukkot, to be able to do exactly what you would be able to do if you were there at those feasts. Okay, so let's open it with some scripture. This is from Leviticus 23:33 through 44. It says, "Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, on the 15th of this 7th month is the feast of Sukkot for 7 days to the Lord. On the first day," I'm trying to move some things around here where I can see, "on the first day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work. For 7 days, you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day, you shall have a holy convocation and present an offering by fire to the Lord. It is an assembly. You shall not do any laborious work." And then he goes on, he says, "These are the appointed times of the Lord." So he's starting here with Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And now he's going to go through it again. You'll get some details the second time through. And the thing to remember about these appointed times is their prophecy. So when he says, "These are the appointed times of the Lord," there's some prophecy in here that we should be paying attention to. Not just let's go through the motions again this year, but he says, "You shall proclaim them as holy convocations." Somebody sent me an email this week, like, how can I proclaim the holy convocations? Do them. What you were doing is a proclamation, as long as you're not hiding what you're doing. If you just ask for a week off to go camping in the fall every year, then nobody knows. That's not a proclamation. All it's proclaiming is you're going camping once a year. But if you tell your boss, or if you tell your coworkers or your replacement for the week, or your substitute, look, we celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles each year. And so I need off this time. I need off these days each year. And I particularly need them this year, because these are the appointed times of the Lord. These are his holy convocations. When you're not hiding what you're doing and you're proclaiming what you were doing, it doesn't mean you have to go out and be all self-righteous. And, if you don't accommodate me, I'll do this, or I'll get mad and take my toys home and won't play. That's not the attitude of Sukkot. That's not the attitude of Passover. But you can very humbly proclaim these appointed times by not hiding what they are. It's not just a week off or 10 days off in the fall. It's not just a day off in the spring. It's much more than that. So you don't hide them. You proclaim them by what you're doing. You present offerings by fire to the Lord. Yes, it will cost you something. People will have something to say about it. They'll question it. They'll roll their eyes. They'll try to convince you you're on the wrong track, that, why are you doing this when you should be celebrating a time when somebody was born in a manger and he was born to Christmas songs. Okay, set all that aside and say, okay, if I'm going to present my offering by fire, then I should expect people to maybe taunt me if I proclaim a holy convocation. I should expect people to be skeptical. I should expect people to try to throw roadblocks in my way if I don't hide behind a camping trip once a year, right? So the offering comes by fire. It's going to be hardship for you to be able to make it to Sukkot. It's going to cost you something. He says your burnt offerings, your grain offerings, sacrifices, drink offerings, each day's matter on its own day. Remember the apostles talk about, I've been poured out like a drink offering. So you're going to be a burned offering. You're going to be a grain offering. You're going to be a sacrifice. You're going to be a drink offering. Each day's matter on its own day, besides those of the Sabbaths of the Lord, and beside your gifts, and beside all your vowed and voluntary offerings, which you give to the Lord. On exactly the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the crops of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days. See how he's repeating himself? There's a real emphasis here on Sukkot, and maybe we can find out why. With a rest on the first day and a rest on the 8th day. Now on the first day, you shall take for yourselves the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches and branches of trees with thick branches, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. And if you've had a chance to watch the video on Sukkot in the book of Revelation, we talked about what do the willows symbolize at Sukkot? Well, the willows, the little leaves on them resemble mouths. And in the Jewish literature, those little mouths, as you beat them onto the ground, as you beat the willow branches onto the ground, it's symbolic of just smashing the words of the accuser. It's like smashing Satan's mouth into the ground with these willows of the brook. And in fact, in the book of Revelation, it talks about how he's going to be thrown down, that he will no longer have the power to accuse. And so it's, some of the prophecy, this is very brief in the Torah, just says take willows of the brook, but all the understanding of what it's about, what it symbolizes, how it really becomes a prophecy as John sees it in the book of Revelation. This is where the Jewish sources can help us out. He says, you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. So you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a permanent statute throughout your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall live in Sukkot for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in Sukkot. So that your generation, because see, number one, boots is really hard to pronounce. Like I said before, it's when you can't pronounce boots properly, it's sukkah seems like, this little hut that you put up and decorate with all kinds of boots in it. So I just prefer to substitute Sukkot if you're wondering why I'm not reading exactly what's on the text, because I don't know about you, but I really don't want a sukkah decorated with boots. But the idea of a sukkah is because it's flimsy, it's temporary, you can see through it. You can see into the realm just beyond. And imagine sitting in your sukkah at the Feast of Sukkot. And if you knew how close the kingdom was as you sat in that sukkah, if you knew you were already sitting in the kingdom, that the very flimsiness of the structure, that it was designed so that you could see through those branches, so that you could see from that temporary realm out into another realm. He says, so that your generations may know that I had the sons of Israel live in Sukkot when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am your God. So Moses declared to the sons of Israel the appointed times of the Lord. So he's saying, if you're going to celebrate Sukkot, you have to understand that it's related to when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. It's directly related to that. So as you remember this time, it's so that you will also remember this time. And what is the feast that ties the two times together? Shavuot, right there in the middle. That's the axis of Passover and Sukkot. So at Shavuot, at the giving of the Torah, that's when Moses would have received way more details. They would have just lived through Passover. And then they left Ramses, they went to Sukkot. And at the time they went into Sukkot, they went into the clouds of glory. They went into the divine presence. So he says, when you're living in the divine presence, I want you to remember when I brought you out of Egypt, when you entered in. Okay, so that's our background that I wanted to give you. So as we go into this passage from the Song of Songs that the sages are associating with the priestly blessing, you would have a backdrop for when the priestly blessing is given. So the priestly blessing is, you might sometimes hear it referred to as the Aaronic benediction. You might hear it called the Birchat HaKohanim, which is the blessing of the priests. And typically today it is done each Shabbat in the synagogue. But historically, it's always been especially important to be done at the 3 foot festivals. And remember, the foot festivals are Passover or Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, because you literally had to walk up to Jerusalem at those 3 festivals. And so they came to be called the foot festivals. And this would be a time when all Israel is assembled, when the high priest, he could bless the entire nation at these 3 particular festivals. And so as he pronounces these blessings, we can see how prophetic it would have been associated with these festivals, because we just read a passage where it's really, driven home how important the festivals of Sukkot and Pesach are. As you go up, part of it is what you're going to bring in sacrifice. Part of it is what you're going to bring in joy. But part of it is what you're going to receive through the priestly blessing, through the sharing of what you've brought up. So let's look at the specific passage that I'm talking about here. It's in Song of Songs 2:9, and it says, "My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice." And like I said in a previous lesson, we talked about him peering through the temple walls as people go up to pray, how the retaining wall of Mount Zion is there. It's not necessarily a wall of the temple, but Mount Zion is very much a part of the temple, the complete picture of the temple. And so it's surrounding the holy hill is what it's doing. And so it talks here about, or in the last lesson, about how that presence is still there. And that's why so many people from so many nations who may not even understand what they're doing, they want to go up to the holy hill. They want to pray there because of the presence that rests there. So as we take it one step farther into the priestly blessing, this is the scripture that we're working with, where it says he is looking through the windows and he's peering through the lattice. So remember, windows and lattice. And even though they're 2 separate things, they're both structures that you would look through and you could you could feel as though you're part of what's on the other side. See, we looked at the sukkah and said, okay, it's intentionally, you build it very flimsy so that you can see the stars through the roof, through the branches on the roof, so that you can see out. And it gives you the sense that you're looking through windows, that you're peering through the lattice into that other realm of the Garden of Eden, basically the third heaven. And so working with that particular text, he's standing behind our wall. He's looking through the windows. He's peering through the lattice. So 3 parts. He stands behind the wall. He's looking through the windows, and he's peering through the lattice. What is he doing? In fact, what are these things? Well, the Midrash to the Song of Songs on this verse suggests that one of the windows that Elohim is looking through is the space between the shoulders of the Kohanim, or the priests, when they stand together in the synagogue pronouncing the priestly blessing. So if you've never been in a synagogue before, you'll have to try to imagine what it looks like. And this would be an Orthodox synagogue. I'm not sure exactly what would go on in a conservative or a Reform synagogue, but in an Orthodox synagogue. And by the way, just this is a good thing for you to know. If you ever visit the Western Wall, technically, it's a synagogue. It hasn't always been considered a synagogue, but since Israel became a state, some things changed, and now it's literally a synagogue. And that's why they'll ask the men to put on a kippah if they go up there to pray. That's why they'll keep the men and the women separated. I'm not making a judgment call on whether that's wrong or right. I'm just saying this is the reality of it. And so this is why it's such an important place where the priestly blessing is pronounced at Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot. In fact, it's so crowded. When we went a couple of years ago, we wanted to go. And we did not get there soon enough. There was no place to park in Jerusalem. And so we couldn't get parked, and we couldn't get to the Western Wall in time to get the priestly blessing. Literally, it was full. You just couldn't get in. But my friend Celestine, she sent me some audio, which I hope you will be able to hear when I play it. If not, I'll get you a link, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. And so you can hear again how it's a little bit different when it's pronounced at these feasts, or when it's done in an Orthodox synagogue. So since the destruction of the Second Temple, in a synagogue, each Shabbat, the first call will go out to the Kohanim, to those who are descended from the priestly line. And generally they know who they are, because over many centuries, they've had to obey certain laws in the Torah about who they can marry, who they cannot marry. And that has, if you think about who you can marry or not marry, that tends to, keep that particular commandment pretty close to you. And therefore, maybe they might have a better grasp of their pedigree than someone else. But the Kohanim, the priests, those descended from the priestly line, and the Levites, or the Leviim, if they're in attendance, they will be given the honor of coming up and pronouncing the Birchat HaKohanim. If there's no Kohen in the synagogue, then it could pass over to a Levi. But in general, there will be at least one Kohen in the synagogue. It does not mean he's the rabbi of the synagogue. He may just be a congregant. But even if you're not a rabbi, if you're a Kohen, then you have to know this procedure, because anytime you go to synagogue, you might be called up in order to do this procedure, because remember, it's the sons of Aaron that are supposed to pronounce the blessing. And so it's only in the absence of one of these sons of Aaron that the blessing would not necessarily go down, but pass to someone else, like say a Levi. And the tradition is that if you're in the synagogue if someone does pronounce the priestly, almost said policely, I did just say policely, the priestly blessing, that you would not look at him. As he pronounces the blessing, you would look down, you might close your eyes, you might avert your eyes, but you don't want to look directly at the person doing the blessing, because the person is not the source of the blessing. He's only the person pronouncing the blessing. So you don't want to ever confuse the Kohen with the Holy One himself, who is the source of the blessing. And so as they say a line, they might say the first line, Yivarechecha Adonai, and you might hear mumbling, or you might hear whispering in the synagogue. And so at the end of each of those lines, and I'll have the lines broken down for you on these slides, so that if you've never seen them broken down that way, not only broken down by phrase, but broken down by word, because like I said, it's a little bit different in the synagogue. But as the phrase is completed, you might hear the respondents, the people in the congregation, say under their breath, they'll whisper it, Ken yehi ratzon. Ken yehi ratzon. And that roughly translates to, may it be so, may it be your will. Because remember, ratz, the Hebrew two-letter root ratz, it means to run. Like if I said, ani ratzah, you'd be saying, I ran. And so where you run represents your will. Remember the fifth abomination of the wicked lamp in Proverbs, where it says feet that are quick to run to evil? Sometimes we get caught up in evil accidentally, not in the fifth abomination. The feet that run quickly to evil are the feet that have predetermined to do evil. It's their will. It's the will of the one on top of the feet. Where your brain and your heart have decided to send you, your feet will now carry you, because it represents the will. It's the will of your mind. It's the will of your heart. So they're saying, as the blessings are pronounced, you respond with, Ken yehi ratzon, may it be your will. May you run to perform this on my behalf. And that's definitely what we want. We definitely want him to lift his countenance upon us speedily. Now, when will this happen? Well, if you're keeping up with the synagogue service, at some point in the service, you will hear the cantor, or it's sometimes called the chazan. He will call out the word kohanim. And so if you hear kohanim, and then it seems like everything settles down for a second, and then you might see some men come out of the men's side and go up toward the ark. At that point, what will happen is the Levites in the synagogue, and these are descendants of the tribe of Levi, what they will do is they will get water pitchers and they will wash the hands of the Kohanim. So the Leviim and the Kohanim will come up together, and the Levites will wash the hands of the Kohanim just like they would have in temple times. Next, you're going to see the Kohanim remove their shoes. Remember, when you know you're in the presence, you'll hear phrases like, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. And so the idea here is they're going up to the ark, which is going to represent the Ark of the Covenant, because the Torah scrolls, the prophets, and so forth are in there. They're going to take their shoes off. They're going to go face the ark. And then they're going to cover their heads with their prayer shawls. They're going to arrange their fingers in a specific pattern that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about why they do that. And they will recite an introductory blessing. And then at that point, once they've made the blessing facing the ark, then they will turn to the congregation. At this point, and remember, at this point, you're going to see that their hands are outstretched. They'll be about shoulder level. And you'll see that pattern we're going to talk about. And they've got the prayer shawls over their head. The tent, like the wings of the Shekhinah, or the wings of the divine presence. And then the chazan, or the cantor, he will call out each word of the blessing one by one. You won't hear the full phrase that maybe you're used to hearing. Instead, it will be word by word. And as the leader speaks out the word, the Kohanim, it might be one, it might be 10 Kohanim up there. If you're a Kohen, you go up. They're going to repeat that word after him. In temple times, I guess there would have never been any question that a Kohen would know the words and know how to pronounce them. But, the farther we get away from the temple service, the more likely it is that you might have a Kohen in there who really doesn't know the procedure. And so he'll call out the words one by one. The Kohanim will repeat the words of the blessing. And then afterward, they'll turn back to the ark again, and there'll be some concluding words, and you'll be able to see those. And in general, Numbers 6, 22 through 27, most people are familiar with this, even if they're not really biblically literate. They've probably heard this blessing somewhere. And so the preamble is, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and to his sons, saying, thus you shall bless the sons of Israel. You shall say to them, and here's the text of the blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. And then there's this concluding matter where it says, so they shall invoke my name on the sons of Israel, and I then will bless them. That's pretty cool. If they invoke his name upon the children of Israel, then he will bless them. It's kind of a cause and effect sort of thing. But that helps you to understand why you're not supposed to look at the Kohen or the person pronouncing the blessing, because he's the vehicle, he's the mouthpiece. But you don't want to look at him as the source of the blessing, because he says their job is to invoke my name, and my job is to bless them. And so if you've never had the priestly blessing pronounced over you before, you don't know what you're missing. It's truly a blessing. I mean, literally a blessing. And so again, like I said, you'll notice that the Kohanim, they will cover their heads with the prayer shawl when they do this particular blessing. You might also see people in the congregation covering their heads or faces with a prayer shawl, so that they're not tempted to look at the person as the source of the blessing. And this picture I've got up here, this again is at the wall, the Western Wall. And what I wanted you to see here is, if you don't know what you're looking at, it does look like a bunch of people in white sheets. But I want you to take a careful look at the picture. And if you'll notice, the men's backs are to the wall, and their hands and their fingers are out in front of them, and they're pointed away from the wall, not in the direction that we would think. Just by, first glance at the picture. You have to take the second and the third glance to see exactly what they're doing right there. Because if they were just praying, they would be turned the other direction. How do we know they're doing the Aaronic benediction? Because they're facing out from the temple area. And so this tells you that this picture was taken during the time of the priestly blessing. And so every Cohen, apparently, that could get crowded up in there next to the retaining wall, they pull them up there, and then they cover their heads, they'll turn around, and then they would turn out and they would bless the people who would be farther out from the wall. You can even see that little boy's head. If you'll look, there's a little boy's head. You can see his little kippah sticking up in there. And you can kind of see which way he's facing. And even if you didn't know that their hands were outstretched, it would still tell you, well, they're not facing in the direction I thought they would be. I thought they were praying. Well, they're not just praying. These guys are blessing with the Aaronic benediction. And the Holy One says, in some mysterious way, what happens is with this blessing, the sacred name will be placed upon Israel. And then he blesses. And the traditional way, and if you've not joined us for the lesson of Jerusalem itself, and how the Hebrew letter Shin is just superimposed on the city of Jerusalem through its valleys. You've got the Kidron Valley over here, you've got the Hinnom Valley over here, and then it's really hard to see the middle one, but it's theirs. It's more built up than the other two. The other two are still valleys. The middle one's more built up. So unless you've got a good aerial, like a drone view, it's a little harder to see, but it's still there. The Hebrew letter Shin, which means teeth, it's superimposed right down upon the holy city. So when he says the place where I will put my name, well, part of that understanding is there is a Hebrew letter Shin, literally stamped onto the city of Jerusalem. And so it's this particular letter that the Kohanim will form with their hands. And that particular letter, if you'll look on any normal mezuzah, I know there's all sorts of artistic ones out there, but if you'll look on a normal mezuzah, there should be a Hebrew letter Shin somewhere on it. Even if it is a very creative, mezuzah, you can still usually find the Shin. What is that? That again is the holy name stamped, sealed onto that home. It tells you who they serve. And of course, it stands for El Shaddai. We'll wait till we get to the picture there so you can see what I'm talking about. And again, as you saw in the picture, even though the men were covered up, today, we're going to contrast that with how they did it in temple times. Today, they're holding their hands typically right at shoulder height, not way up here, but they'll bring it level, just like there, holding their hands at shoulder height. And just file that back because it's going to mean something later. This particular picture, I did a screenshot from, I believe, the Times of Israel. I've got the author's name on there and the date if you wanted to go look it up to see the full article. But what this is an artist representation of the priests performing that priestly blessing. They're at, I assume, at the Western Wall. I cannot remember what particular occasion this was on, but it says April 7th, 2017. And I think this is when they did a reenactment, possibly of some of the temple services associated with Pesach. But what I want you to see in the picture, it's not just a random picture. I want you to see that as the priests are standing there, notice, number one, that their hands are held different ways. Right? You're going to see a couple of them. Well, let's see. Well, the one to the left, I'm assuming it's left, that it didn't mirror. He's just holding his out. And you can see the Hebrew letter Shin that he's formed with each hand. And then you can see another one. He's just holding his hands out. And then there's another one. It looks like he's almost formed not just two Shins, but little triangles in there. And then the other one is the more traditional, because not only does he make two Shins, as he puts his thumbs together, I'm going to show you on another slide how that forms a Shin as well. So as we're talking about what's normal and so forth, remember, it's not cookie cutter. You might get different things. You might see different things, but it's good to know what those things represent. Okay, so don't expect, if you say, well, I went to a synagogue and it didn't look exactly like that. Well, no, it could have looked like any of those, actually. And sometimes it does depend upon the background of the Cohen. What did he grow up knowing, experiencing, or maybe is he just, doesn't have much background at all, and he's, I don't want to say monkey see, monkey do, but he's kind of trying to copy maybe what another Cohen is doing because he hasn't had the education. All right, so here's the diagram. And you can see the Hebrew letter Shin there in the middle, so you have a point of reference. And you can see how both the right and the left hand can form themselves into a Hebrew letter Shin very easily. I know we all thought that Spock came up with live long and prosper, but Spock was Jewish. So it wasn't the most creative thing in the world, but it was pretty cool. But also you can notice once he forms two Shins, using each hand for a Shin, if he just snugs his thumbs up together, he creates another one. He can create a Shin within a Shin. And how does that happen? Well, you count the physical space represented by the hands themselves. And then you also count what, if you were a book publisher, you would call it white space. If you look at the slide, there's white space on the slide. And so you can actually make, you can make objects or outlines or whatever, not just with the physical space, but you also make it with the white space. And if you've ever read a Becky book or Creation Gospel book, you'll see, get an idea when the formatting of a book takes place, how important it is that there's sufficient white space on a page of a document, or the human brain kind of gets overwhelmed with a sea of words. You're floating in words. And so we've modified based on some research so that we're offering the reader plenty of white space so that he doesn't become discouraged or fatigued and say, oh my goodness, I can't take more than a paragraph of this because this paragraph goes on forever. You incorporate the white space, which is very much part of the message of the book. It's what you can't see sometimes that keeps you from becoming fatigued, right? And like I said, if you look at this position that's on the diagram, if the priest just kind of brings in the index fingers and also touches them together, you might see that. I've seen that more than once, and it almost looks like a little triangle when they do that. But the idea here is, in some way, create the Hebrew letter Shin, which represents El Shaddai, the name of Adonai. How are they putting the name upon us? Well, one way is going to be through the Hebrew letter Shin. And in fact, let's go back right here, getting ahead of myself. As you look at that Hebrew letter Shin, if you know anything at all about Hebrew letters, you can see another Hebrew letter that makes up a Hebrew letter Shin. And it's the Hebrew letter Vav. Vav. And a Vav is just kind of a peg. It's kind of pretty much a straight line. It's got a little kind of curve at the top, but pretty much a straight line. And a Vav is a nail or something that connects. It's like a peg. It connects this thing and that thing. It also has a value to it. Like Psalm 119, Hebrew letters are used in place of numbers. You'll see this sometimes in scripture. And so instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Psalm 119, you'll have Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, and so forth. And sometimes they form acrostics to help you remember the verses. In this particular case, the Vav has a value of 6 because it's the 6th letter of the Aleph Beit. So if you want to use shorthand to write a certain number, you can substitute Hebrew letters. In fact, you might see that maybe on a Jewish calendar or something. So the Hebrew letter Shin, now hold on to your britches right here. The Hebrew letter Shin is made up of Vav, 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 and they're connected at the bottom. And what that would come out to is 6, 6, 6. 6, 6, 6. And you're saying, oh my goodness, I always knew it was demonic. No, it's not demonic. Because if all you saw was the 666, then you would only be seeing the physical representation of that letter. They form those particular symbols with the hand so that, yes, you can see the 666 on each hand. But what you're also supposed to consider is the white space, because if you consider the white space, then all of a sudden it's 6, 6, 6, 6. There's 4 sixes instead of 3 sixes. And if you add the 4 sixes of the white space to the 3 sixes of the physical space, then you have 7 sixes. Now what you have formed is a menorah, a 7-branched menorah. And because a menorah represents spirit, and because a menorah connected the heavens with the earth, with the spirit of the heavenlies with the earth, and you saw that in the tabernacle. They had to light the menorah every night because it had to burn through the night. And it had 7 branches. And so the thing to remember as they're holding up these hands, don't just count what you can see, count what you cannot see, because heaven is what you cannot see. One day you will see, but until the day you will see, then you still have to see what you cannot see. And so that's how the name, that's one way that the name is placed upon the children of Israel. They have to see more than 666. They have to see the spirit shining through it. What did Paul say? The letter kills, but the spirit gives life. Without the spirit, the letter kills. With the spirit, the letter gives life. If spirit leaves your body, you're a dead person. If you're nothing but a spirit, you're a dead person, if you were created to be a human being. But if you put the spirit and the body together, now you're a living creature. And that's what we're going for here. The living creature, not just of substance, but also of spirit. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then I want you to go back, and anybody can find it in the YouTube videos. It's not marked private. You can go back to the year 2019. It's Torah portion number 46, and it's called Ekev, the Torah portion Ekev. There's a part 1 and a part 2. And the title is, What's Inside That Box? 666 and the Grace We Missed. Because what I want you to see, if you look at the bottom picture there, the tefillin, remember these are the phylacteries, these are the leather boxes that Jewish men will put on their heads, and then they will put on their bicep, and then they'll make the 7 wraps with the strap all the way down to the hand, and they'll even tie it around the fingers, because the scripture will refer to putting it on your arm, wrapping it around your hand, and even on your fingers. And so with this configuration, they're touching all those parts that scripture tells us where you're supposed to bind his commandments on you. The one on the bicep, it'll point inward toward his heart. But there's also one called a shel rosh. And the shel rosh, which means of the head, it has a little bit different configuration. And if you look at that bottom picture, you can see what's different about it. Instead of the normal Hebrew letter Shin, which would look like a 666 joined at the bottom, the one that goes on the head has 4 prongs. It would be 6666. And again, what is that doing? When a Jewish male puts on his tefillin, when he puts on the tefillin on his head every morning when he prays, except for Shabbat, they don't lay tefillin on Shabbat. But when he puts that on his head, it reminds him, as I keep these commandments throughout the day, I have to remember it's not just the letter of the Torah, it's the spirit of the Torah. That's what those 4 prongs of the Shin represent. So you've got the letter and the spirit and how it works together. If you're going to serve El Shaddai, it reminds you, then you have to engage him not just in the word of truth, but in the spirit of truth. That's what that's about. So now, as you go back and you look at the Shin and see the priest there trying to form that Hebrew letter Shin, and then you see how he's with the white space. You can imagine, if you print it out, you could probably take your marker and mark off where you see the white space, and you can see the 4-prong Shin now with the 3-prong Shin. And it reminds you, when this priestly blessing comes upon me, I am being blessed with his name, not just by the physical speaking of the name, but with the power of the spirit that he is, which is just so cool. Now, the idea here, remember the Kohanim in the synagogue, they'll go stand before the ark. And I'll show you a picture here in a minute of the blessing at the wall. And you can see the ark standing down there in the sea of people. But the Kohanim, they will stand before the ark to recite the blessing, because his word represents Elohim himself. In the book of Revelation, Yeshua is called the Word of God. And so that's the physical word. But there's also a spirit that word represents, just like with the hands. And so the Kohanim, remember, they'll first face the ark, and then they'll turn around and they'll face the people. The idea is, as they stretch those hands out and form the Shin, then they're making lattices. Remember how he's looking through the lattice. He's peering through the lattice. Well, they're making this lattice of their words. And what's happening, remember, the divine presence spoke from between the 2 cherubim at the ark. And so behind them is the ark. And so it's like his voice is coming through them, going through their hands, and going out to the people. So from the divine presence resting over the ark, his voice coming between the 2 cherubim, going through the priests, going through the lattices, and he's looking out at you. He, in effect, and this is why you don't look at the Kohen, the Holy One himself is speaking to you. the Holy One himself is blessing you through his word. And they say that the divine presence descends and stands in the congregation, which is based on a psalm. So the sources add to this idea of the windows and lattices, that they're formed by the spaces between the Kohanim and during the blessing, like looking through the lattices of his hands. And this is what they're saying, that it's like the divine presence looks through the fingers of the Kohanim during the blessing, and he's looking on his people in the most direct way at that time. And there's a reason for this. It means more than you think it does. It means way more than you think it does. And you're going to love it, by the way. So just imagine, as you see that formation of the hand, and you imagine the high priest up there blessing you at Passover or Shavuot or Sukkot, and the ark being behind him, knowing that divine word was there, knowing that his presence was abiding there. And then as the priest raises his hands to bless you, that he is looking directly at you with intention. And that's why you say, Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will to do exactly as you have said. Now we know in ancient times, the priests would recite this twice a day. They had a special platform built in the temple, and it was expected that if you were an able-bodied person, that you should stand for the blessing so that it is face to face, which is how he spoke to Moses. He wants to speak to you face to face as well, even though now it's through lattices and windows for your own protection. If you were able-bodied, it's expected that you would stand for this blessing. You're just not going to look at the person. You're actually imagining receiving that blessing directly from the Holy One. And like I said, in the synagogue, the leader's going to call out each word of blessing one by one instead of by phrase, and the Kohanim will repeat it. They'll turn back to the ark, say the concluding words. And what I'm going to try to do right now, I have no idea if you'll be able to hear it. If you can, give me a thumbs up. If you can't, maybe a thumbs down or something. But I would love for you to be able to hear this. If you can't, it's okay. We'll figure out another way. But I want you to be able to hear how this is done when it's done the way that it was done on the feast days. And just imagine temple times, Israel gathered there at the temple. Imagine how many people would have even been gathered around this wall. Maybe there wasn't room for everybody to get up there. But just imagine them surrounding the holy mountain. But the high priest blessing them as this special time of the Moedim. This is the one picture where you can kind of see there's a couple of arcs. They've moved down there on the western wall. But look how many people are crowded in there. So let's try and let's see if you can hear this. And like I say, if you can, maybe give a thumbs up. If you can't, maybe a thumbs down. And we'll just have to kind of go on through it. But I'm hoping you can't hear this. No. Okay. Let me try something different then. Nothing. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback, but let me try. And if this doesn't work, let me try something different then. Nothing. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback, but let me try. And if this doesn't work, let me try something different then. Nothing. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback. Let me try. And if this doesn't work, let me try something different then. Nothing. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback. Let me try. And if this doesn't work, let me try something different then. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback. Let me try. And if this doesn't work, try something different. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback. Let me try. And if this doesn't work, try something different. Let me try this. This may not, there may be too much feedback. If this doesn't work, try something different. Okay, so I don't think I can get it to play where there's not a lot of background noise and so forth, at least for our YouTube viewers, because we got two different platforms going at one time. And so what I'll do is I'll try to provide a link where you can go and you can listen to it. But as you listen to it, you can still use these slides. Because like I said, I broke it down by transliteration, word by word. And you, as bad as the recording is, you at least heard enough of it to hear how they're doing one word of the blessing at a time. And then the people who were gathered there down in the down at the wall, they are repeating, they're singing the blessing back to the Kohen. And that's what I loved about this. It finally dawned on me how this is different in a synagogue on a weekly Shabbat. This would take place. The cantor, the chazan, he'll call out word by word, and the Kohen, the Kohanim will repeat this. So if the cantor says, well, then the Kohanim, they will echo that. The congregants don't say it. But on these special days that we're talking about, the Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, where you'll have this guy down here at the wall and he will call it out word by word to everybody. I mean, it's on a public address system. You can hear it echoing all over the place. Even if you can't get in there in person, you can still hear it echoing through the Jerusalem stone. And so when he calls out, when the Kohen sings out, then you will hear literally thousands of people responding and echoing what he says. Yivarecha. And then he'll go to the next line, and they'll do the next line. And then he'll do the next line, and they'll do the next line. And this goes on until the entire blessing is pronounced. And that's when you realize Israel is a nation of priests. Because on other times, it's just the priests who say the blessing. But on feast days, all Israel are priests. And they echo like the Kohanim. And that's when you know you become part of something so important as the priests are the priests to Israel. So Israel are the priests to the nations. And so as they stand there at that western wall and the priest sings out, Yivarecha, and you would respond back to him, Yivarecha. What you're saying is, I accept the mission. I accept that I am part of a nation of priests, and I will take this message. I will take this blessing, this gospel, and I will take it back to wherever I came from. I can't do the whole thing. I'm not that good. But imagine, just imagine what it would feel like to stand there. Imagine, again, what was seen at Shavuot in Acts chapter 2. What did the people around see? They saw cloven tongues of fire. What does the priestly blessing look like to you? What does the Hebrew letter Shin look like to you? It's cloven tongues of fire. Exactly. It's the voice of Adonai. It's the Torah descending and alighting upon a nation of priests. And all of a sudden, these nations are saying, what must we do? What must we do? They have come in order to receive of the priestly blessing. And now Yeshua has said, you are a nation of priests. Go and do this. Take this back. If it's Shavuot, he says, you're going to receive power from on high on this day. You're going to receive a priestly blessing on this day. And then you are going to go and you're going to bless the nations. You're going to do what Israel has always been called to do, to be a light to the nations and to show the nations how the light of his countenance turns. This is just such big news for me, just such big news to see not just Pesach and Sukkot in a new light, but to see what's happening at Shavuot in a new light with cloven tongues of fire, El Shaddai alighting upon the apostles. And I can only imagine, had somebody paused and started the priestly blessing when this occurred? I don't know, but I think it's a really good chance. I would probably bet 10 push-ups on it. I don't know, maybe more. Here's the second line. I can say it for you. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And of course, you would say Amen. But there's two places where the divine presence stands in this verse that we're looking at, the windows and the lattices. And it's said to represent two times. In better times, it says Israel is watched over through the Holy One's window in the temple. And then at the time when a temple is standing, they say his presence is much more apparent in the earth. It's much more present all over the earth because you've got a nation of priests who are being blessed with this blessing and then taking that blessing in the light of his countenance out to the nations. In the times of exile, they say, he just peers through the lattice. He's hiding his presence But at the very same time, he's providing for his children's welfare as his name is placed upon his children every Shabbat in the synagogue, at the feasts, at Pesach, at Shavuot, at Sukkot. He's peering through the lattices when the priestly blessing is pronounced upon us at those times. He's not saying I'm not there. He's saying I never left you. It's just that I was on the other side of the window. I was on the other side of the lattice, but I could see you just fine. And imagine how close you are. If somebody stands, if I'm standing right here at this window in my office, and you were standing just on the other side of that window, we could put our hands up on that window and we'd be virtually touching, be that close, that close. So in the temple times, when the Kohanim recited the blessing, they would lift their hands all the way above their heads. If they weren't in the temple, they would just stretch them out at shoulder height, as you see it today in the synagogue. So the difference would be at a temple service, the higher level of the hands was thought to create windows, and I'm using air quotes for windows, between their head and arms, symbolizing the revealed presence. Outside of the temple, they would just do the shoulder height, which represents the lattices, and that's the more concealed presence. It neither slumbers nor sleeps. And it doesn't matter if Israel has been in a spiritual slumber, or even if her physical body is in a sleep of death. It doesn't matter whether you're alive or whether you're asleep. He is very patiently standing behind the wall. He is very patiently peering at you between the lattices. And he's waiting for us to return to his appointed times. That's why this blessing is identified specifically with the appointed times, when all Israel would come up to Jerusalem. And he says, I need you to come up to Jerusalem at your appointed times. And so with his people in exile, how is he going to start to gather us so he can bless us? Well, he's going to start with his appointed times. You say, why did I wake up one morning and want to observe Passover? Why did I wake up one morning and want to observe Shabbat? Why did I wake up one morning and start building a sukkah in my backyard when I didn't even know what I was doing? Okay, you started all this and you didn't even know what you were doing. You woke up one day and said, I thought I understood the word, but maybe I don't. Maybe there's way more to it than I ever dreamed. And all of a sudden you realize the word was waiting. For some people, the world is waiting. For us, the word was waiting for us to return to his appointed times. He's been very patiently standing right there. He never left us. He never forsook us. And when we turned back and said, let me try to understand this Passover. Let me try to understand Pentecost. I know all about Pentecostal churches, but I'm not sure I understand Pentecost. Well, let me understand what these tabernacles are. What goes on in a synagogue? What happens on Shabbat? As we began taking baby steps, he said, this is what I'm talking about. I'm speaking to them. I want to gather them to my temple. I'm going to have to start with the lattices. I'm going to have to gather them first to my appointed times. And then if they turn to my appointed times, then I can gather them from the lattices to the windows, and they would experience my revealed presence. And you can kind of see the lattice work of that retaining wall there to the holy hill. And just imagine him peering through that saying, when will my children get back for the feasts? Especially since Israel shut the door the past 2 years. But here's this is such a beautiful quote. I couldn't help but put it in here. If you like beautiful quotes, if you love words as much as I do. and then hearing words about the word. This is a quote from this particular verse in the Midrash Rabbah. It says, "Your beloved has been with you through all your years of exile, only you did not know it. He was peering through your lattices so that you could sense his presence during your exile. He was seen by none, but seeing all, suffering with you and caring for you without a moment's pause. There was never a moment he wasn't there." It says, although the Father has been with Israel the whole time, it will feel as though he has come skipping over the hills and leaping over the mountains quickly to redeem them. And how many of you were just as, I don't know if we call it egocentric, as I was when I first came into the fullness of the Torah, and I thought, just because I found the Torah, Messiah must be coming back tomorrow. That's how it feels. And then as time stretched on, you're kind of glad maybe he didn't come, because there was so much left to discover, and there's still so much to discover. But when the time of redemption comes, it will feel as though time is speeding up, that he's skipping and leaping over these mountains, over these obstacles of the nations to find us. And the rabbis say it'll be like when a son is overtaken with a fever and he was just unconscious for days on end, and his father sat right by his bedside. He nursed him through the fever. He put the cold washcloths on his forehead. He made sure that he took in enough liquid. And the son was completely unconscious that the father was there. And then one day he wakes up and he says, "Father, where have you been?" He says, "I've been right here, son. I've been through your whole illness. I never left your side. And all those years we were unaware of the fullness of his word and the closeness of his presence. He was right here by our sides, nursing us through our illness and saying, come back, come back, come back to Shabbat, come back to the feasts. Come on back, learn the appointed times. I don't want to look at you through a lattice forever. Even though we're close, we can be closer. That's the goal." And they say the winter that it talks about, it says, "Lo, the winter is past." The winter is the dark winter of exile when Israel is spiritually asleep. But their beloved awakens them, resurrecting them from the exile where he kept them. They arise with the words of the song and with his blessing. Then that's actually a quote from verses 10 and 11, where it says, "My beloved responded and said to me, 'Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone.'" And so this is a song of resurrection. When he says, "Arise, my darling," he means arise from the dead. He means arise from your spiritual sleep. What has been happening to us when we woke up to Shabbat, when we woke up to the feast, when we woke up to the Torah? He said, "Arise. It's time to wake up, sweetie." Wake up. I want to resurrect you from your exile. I want to prepare you for the resurrection of the dead, a time when the winter will be past, when the rain will be over and gone. And they say that the song of resurrection, with which we will all be resurrected at that time, at the time of the great trumpet, the great shofar, the song that we will arise to, that we will hear. It says, "Blessed is he who knows the sound of the shofar." And the song, they say, that will be sung when we hear that shofar is this: "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace." Now, you always knew there was more to that Aaronic benediction, didn't you? When he resurrects us, when he looks for those upon whom his name has been placed, El Shaddai, when that great shofar sounds, this is what he's saying. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. What is he doing? When he makes his face shine upon you, you are going to be graciously, through his grace, resurrected. He is going to lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And you know what? You won't have to rest in peace. You will live in peace at that great resurrection. And so it explains something that maybe you never thought about. If you've ever been to a Jewish cemetery and you look around at the gravestones, you can see this picture on a lot of them, not all of them, but on some of them. A Jewish gravestone will have the hands of the Aaronic benediction engraved on the stone. That's the expectation. That when you hear the sounds of that blessing, the sound of that song, that you will burst out of that grave, that body will be reformed, your spirit will be placed back into that brand new body. And his face will shine upon you. It will be gracious to you. It will lift you up and it will give you peace. Tell you what, I haven't ordered my gravestone quite yet, but when I do, or whoever orders my gravestone, I tell you what, that is not bad in terms of what would you want people to know about you? Well, this symbol right here, if they could know the story behind it, it would tell them that I 100% expect to be resurrected from this grave. I 100% expect him to bless me because his name is on me. In this case, with the gravestone, the name is literally on the person. That's just mighty clever. But I mean, that'll preach. You can preach that. You could take people into a graveyard and you could preach Messiah by just having them look at this symbol and explaining to them what it meant. Since we know the audio won't do double duty, I'm not going to try to play this for you, but if you will key into YouTube Aaronic blessing, Rico Cortez, Wisdom and Torah, you will hear Rico's rendition. He has a beautiful rendition of the Aaronic benediction. And let that play. Let it play more than once. I know they don't loop, but let it play more than once. Let Brother Rico's just beautiful voice, let those words penetrate your spirit. Let it get into the white space. And think of the resurrection. Think of you coming out of your exile of spiritual slumber. Awake, you sleeper, arise from the dead. And think of all the beautiful things he's shown you so far. And how many beautiful things are still waiting now that you're starting to wake up a little bit. He's stirring his nest in you, stirring you. He doesn't want to scare you. You know what happens when you scare people out of a dead sleep? He's not doing that, but he's very gently shaking you. Wake up, wake up, wake up. It's almost here. The day is almost here. And that's what we want. We want to be expectant of the day. And if the song of the Aaronic benediction intrigues you, it's not in the book, But the book is ready, 144,000 harps, the hidden songs of Israel. It's now live. Don't buy it on Shabbat, of course, but you can go to our website. There'll be a little bit of lag time there. You can go to Amazon. You could take the ISBN to your local bookseller. They can order it. But it's a good summary book of these hidden songs, just like, did anybody know the Aaronic benediction was the resurrection song? There's so many songs that we read through them, but we don't really know their full context. And so that's what 144,000 harps does. It's a collection of 10 songs and the story behind them. So if you have a chance, and plus, if you ever needed a reason, when people say, why should I read the Torah portion? Isn't that man's tradition? Isn't that vain repetition? Of course, once you stop laughing, and you can't laugh in their faces, but once you stop laughing inside, you could say, try this book and see if this changes your mind about reading the Torah portions. Because truly, Torah portions are how we send the roots down instead of out. Because so many people, they read, get information, and sometimes they just end up meaner and nastier than they were when they started, because the roots are going out, they're spreading out, but they're not going down. They won't necessarily be like a tree planted by rivers of living water, because any little wind of doctrine just messes them up. But if you allow the Torah to speak to you with the power of the Holy Spirit, which is what the message is, then your roots will go down. And that's what we're looking for. And it's just an ancient, time-proven method of sending your roots down.